So this is Hal Humphreys, and this is the PI Education webinar. We are talking today about process service. We have Jacob Osojnak with us. Jacob is a friend of the magazine, friend of PI Education, and he is, by my count, one of the best process servers in the country. I know he's a little bit reticent to take too much credit today. This is kind of um, all about me day, but the thing we're going to do today is kind of walk through the process of process serving, and we're going to offer some tips and tricks and things you can do to get into the business, prep for the serve, doing the serve itself, and then other tips and tricks as far as how you can document what you've done and keep track of all the process service you've done. So Jacob, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do, that kind of business.
Well, sure. Thanks, Hal. I appreciate it. And number one, thank you very much for having me on. And I appreciate the chance to kind of bring out my inner process serving nerd. Usually, if I would talk about this with people for an hour, we'd have some eyes glazed over. So I'm happy to have a maybe semi-captive audience today. So yeah, I'll start out by saying that I'll give the whole story of how I got into the business here. First of all, I'm a native Michigander, so I grew up in Michigan. I went to Michigan State University, go Spartans, and I got a degree in international relations. And I actually spent a year after college working in Washington, D.C. in the political arena, and decided it was really not for me. It was not what I had signed up for. So I moved from Washington, D.C. to Chicago, where I've been for the last almost 30 years now. And when I moved to Chicago, I got a start in banking. And specifically, I worked in the collections department for a couple of major regional banks. And as I rose through the ranks in collections, I started working on more difficult cases, which was usually higher value collateral that was being recovered. And as the value of the collateral went up, the efforts that we were using to recoup these assets also increased. So at a certain point, I ended up becoming a liaison between the bank and private investigators who were either skip tracing to find the debtors or the collateral, or were serving a summons and complaint to these folks to get them to court to recover that collateral, or to get a garnishment going. And as I was doing that, interacting with these PIs, I realized, what these guys are doing on their end is a heck of a lot more interesting than what I'm doing, and a heck of a lot more fun. So this is back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, and talked to a couple of PIs, found out that a good way to get into the business was by doing process serving, which was also something that you could do part-time, something where I could work at the bank during the day, and on evenings and weekends, serve some legal papers as kind of a, fun experience and to get some extra income. So I'm going to kind of date myself here. So not having had experience in the field and it being late 1990s, I actually faxed my resume blindly to about 20 or 30 PI agencies in the Chicago area, just saying, hey, I don't have a lot of experience, but I'm interested in serving some papers for you part-time. And I actually got a call back from one agency, and they said, sure, we could, we'd love to have someone serve a couple extra papers for us. So I did that, started serving papers for this one agency, and did it for about the next 10 years part-time.
Oh, wow.
So I decided that, I think I'm ready now for my, second career change. And that I decided I wanted to get my PI license and work as a PI and process server full time. So in the state of Illinois, you need to take your PI exam, which I took and passed. And then the rest is history. I opened up my own agency, Great Lakes Professional Investigation. I'm based in the western suburbs, and for about 10 years now, the bulk of my business has been service of process, and we also do some other things too, court research, skip tracing, a little bit of criminal defense work too, and I love it.
Yeah, it's a fun business to be in. That's one of the things that anybody that asks me about the business, I tell them there are and you know, you just named off pretty much 4 or 5 discrete different things that private investigators can do. And that's one of the things about this business that's difficult for people to understand. Private investigators do a lot of different things. And, you know, it can be domestic surveillance, insurance surveillance, process service like you're doing, courthouse research, expert work. You know, it's just a broad spectrum of stuff that PIs do. So there's a lot of fun stuff to do in this business. I know we've got a couple of stories up from you on Pursuit Magazine. One is on using body cams, and the other is setting boundaries with your clients. And we'll talk about those a little bit later on. But, you know, just for the folks in the crowd that are interested in becoming process servers, um, what, you know, I think listening to your story, there are a couple of things that I picked up on right away. Number one is hit your peers up for some extra work. That's a great way to get a foot in the door. Do you have to be licensed to serve process in Illinois?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm going to have to put on my attorney hat here and say,
Okay.
number one, I am not an attorney. Number two, I do not want to be an attorney. But obviously, the answers I'm going to give during our discussion today are going to be pertinent to my world, which is working here in Illinois and the Chicago area. So I would recommend that anybody that has specific legal questions about the profession or how you serve process, first make sure you follow up with your own state law. And
Right.
that can be by just digging out the statute. If your state has a PI or a process service association, those are great folks to go and talk to and say, hey, I'm new, I have some questions, and I want to do things the right way. Tell me some more. And sometimes for folks that are new to the industry too, and want to get some mentorship, I recommend whatever state you're in, maybe call someone on the complete other side of the state who would not look at you as competition and say, hey, I am new, I want to learn more. And if you can mentor me and, you know, answer some questions, maybe we can have a deal here where I'll help you out. If you have papers on your side of the state that you need served over where I am, I'll give you a great deal as kind of a payback for your mentorship and vice versa.
That's a great idea. And, you know, back to the issue of we're not attorneys. I likewise have never pursued the attorney route in my professional life. And at this point, that ship has sailed. But, you know, we have to be really careful because, like, in certain states, you just have to be, you know, a human being not involved in the case of legal age in order to serve process. In other states, they have service of process statutes that you have to meet certain criteria to be a process server, and that's state by state. And obviously, you know, neither Jacob nor I can keep track of all of those rules for the different 50 states. But whatever state you're in, it should be fairly easy to figure out what the criteria are to become a process server. And I think if a lot of times if you're talking to lawyers who punch out a lot of subpoenas, they're going to know the rules. They're going to be able to walk you through that process. And like Jacob said, talk to your peers. And, you know, one of the things that we have been pushing this year specifically at PI Education Pursuit Magazine is the notion of mentorship and mentoring people. I have always thought of it in terms of, you know, if somebody wants in the business, I'll be glad to share what I know and, you know, introduce them to people if I'm comfortable that they're competent. Um, but the idea of reaching out to someone on the other side of the state is brilliant. It's a great idea. You know, I live in a state that if you stretch a string from Memphis down in the southwest corner of Tennessee up to Bristol in the northeast corner of Tennessee, and then you held that string on Bristol and took the string up the map from Memphis, it actually reaches into Canada. My point is, we're a long state. So if you're in Tennessee or if you're in Texas or another one of these huge states has a big geographic area, that's a great idea, Jacob. Reach out to someone on the opposite side of the state and say, look, if you'll answer some questions along the way, I'll do service over here for you for a good rate and get your foot in the door that way. We've got one comment from Andy Adams. Our local sheriff's office has a process servicing locked down where I live. I get a few from out of town attorneys, but hardly anything locally. Do you have anything like that there where the sheriff does the first round of attempts?
For Illinois, we do, and it is in Cook County, which is essentially the city of Chicago and the very near suburbs. Um, in general, in Cook County, the Cook County Sheriff will get the first crack. Fortunately for us process servers, the Cook County Sheriff is not exactly the best process server out there.
Right.
So usually the attorneys have to kind of suffer through it and then get to assign the case to a private process server when the sheriff can't serve the papers.
And I have noticed with the sheriff's office services, they will. I don't know what they charge there, but in Tennessee, I think one of the counties I know of for sure where the sheriff does serve process, they charge $50 for 3 attempts, and their attempts are half-hearted at best.
Yeah, it's the same thing in the Chicago, right? It's kind of the theory that you don't pay a lot and you don't get a lot.
Right.
They just go through the motions, and obviously, the sheriff is not a PI either, though, so they're not going to follow up by knocking on neighbors' doors and asking questions and calling phone numbers that they find or running a skip trace report. So, they're only as good as what they can find between the street and the door they knock on.
Right. Okay, so any other we've talked about licensing, different states, actual business setup. Let's talk about setting up the business. If you're trying to get into the process service business, um, can you talk a little bit about how you set up your actual business? Because it's one of the things I think a lot of private investigators don't think about, and especially for the retired law enforcement set. If you've got a pension and you're doing this just for kicks and giggles, or you want to continue to do the good work of investigating cases just on the other side, um, a lot of times they don't have the experience of actually setting up a business, setting up a set of books, setting aside money for taxes, that kind of business. Do you have any advice for folks on that?
I think one of the good things that, especially when it comes to process serving, is that as for initial capital, it does not take a lot to get started. Most folks that are independent process servers or small businesses, you can easily work out of your own home. And really, to start out, the main equipment you're going to need is essentially a good laptop, a good smartphone, a great printer with scanning capability, and be prepared to go through thousands of pages of paper per month, printing out papers and things like that. But in terms of kind of the capital expenses, that's really what it's limited to, which is nice because the barriers for entry to a lot of people are pretty reasonable. As for accounting, I know that obviously a lot of people use QuickBooks, which is easy to buy, install, and use, and there's plenty of tutorials online for that. Some of the programs that actually are for process servers to keep track of service of process will have their own accounting functions built in too, so those are an option for some people.
Okay.
I guess my recommendation in this day and age is be professional in terms of your looks. So, the days of handwritten invoices and the days of handwritten affidavits are pretty much over, and they're going to be a turnoff to most major clients. So, however you organize your company in terms of accounting or organizing your service of process, just have it look professional so that people will take you seriously.
Sure. And along those lines, there are a couple things I'd like to point out. I have a bookkeeper who is dedicated to keeping track of the books, payments per job, that kind of business, making sure that everything is organized and ready for the accountant at the end of the year. I strongly encourage people who are starting off in business, spend the money to have somebody manage the books for you. It saves you a lot of trouble down the road. I have dealt with it on both sides, tried to do it by myself and also with the assistance of a bookkeeper, and it makes a huge difference. And the, $50 an hour you pay that person for 4 hours worth of work a month, once you get the thing set up and going, it's really worth it. It's a very simple expense, and it makes your life so much easier. Um, along the lines of being professional, I always recommend that people get a website, have a nice looking website. Don't have something that looks like it comes from, 19, the late 90s, list serve kind of business. Have a good looking website. It's not that difficult these days to put up a website, a one page website. It doesn't cost much. I know there's several services that will do it for free. um, I have found in my business, having a website that looks relatively decent, and is transparent and honest and says, here's who I am, here's what I do. It's a verification of professionalism, and you can point people to it when they say, if you're approaching a new client and you say, hey, I'd like to do X, Y, or Z, you know, lately I've gotten the question, not can I have a business card, but what's your website? So if you don't have a website, probably a good idea to go ahead and hop on and build one of those. We use Strikingly for a lot of our websites around here. It is a crazy simple website builder, one page, just scrolling page. Looks pretty good, I think. Um, what about errors and omissions insurance? Do you have errors and omissions insurance, and do you recommend it for people in the process service business?
I do, since I am in Illinois and I am a licensed private detective, also have a agency license. It's a state requirement that we have insurance, and just like having your car insurance, is just something that everybody should have as a professional. Obviously, in other states, requirements may differ on, because of licensing, but
Right.
again, I think it's something that it's better to have it than not have it.
And it's not usually terribly expensive to get E&O insurance, for private investigators, and other professionals like that. I've got one set of E&O insurance that is crazy expensive, but the business is an expert witness role, and there's a lot more liability there for the PI side. I found that it's not that expensive, and it's just good to have that as a fallback in case somebody gets upset. I did have someone file a complaint against me at the state of Tennessee a couple of years ago. It was for a job that another private investigator had done. I had worked on the case prior, so I got lumped into the complaint. And the first call I made was to my errors and omissions insurance. The second call I made was to the state investigator and invited him to my office to kind of see what my role in the case was, and all that business. But having the knowledge that you've got errors and emissions insurance available if you need it is a really good thing. And a lot of people I find realize they need it a little bit too late.
I recommend the same thing too. If you are a concealed carry person, there are several associations out there that will offer insurance policies for those who carry concealed in the field, whether it's for work or personally. And same thing. It's something where you probably will never need it, but when you do, it's going to be invaluable that you have that card in your pocket with that phone number to be able to make a call and get some
Yeah,
money on the side
and
immediately.
And I'll give a quick shout out to Mike Yergi. Mike Yergi is my insurance guy, Yergi Insurance. He has spent a lot of time and a lot of effort over the years going to PI conferences and supporting private investigator organizations. It's good insurance. He's a good guy. If you're looking for getting E&O insurance, check out yergiinsurance.com. Let's see if I can find a website for that real quick. In the meantime, Jacob, why don't we get started on? I'm going to have you kind of walk through step by step the process service process. First thing that happens, second thing, third thing, all the way through, just real quick.
Okay. Well, I guess, and in my world, most of my work is coming from law firms in the Chicago area. So usually it's going to start with either the paralegal sending over the assignment or someone calling in and saying, hey, I want to check and see if you can serve these papers for us. Here's the situation. Here's where they're located. I can give the person feedback on, whether we can accept this assignment, whether it's in our area and what we charge. And then once it's sent over, then my first step is then to take the raw paperwork and put it into our service of process software, which basically helps me organize and manage the serves that I have in my day. I'm going to name drop myself too. I'm a big proponent of a software called Serve Manager, which is based in Colorado. They've been around for years and they do a great job. They've got a very easy to use, intuitive software, and I like a lot of the things that it does too. For one, when you go out in the field, you can use that software on your mobile phone. When I go to my service address, I can take a picture of the service address, and it will pop that into the essentially the case file for that serve. So I've got it
Right.
in the computer system. It'll log the GPS coordinates with the date and time. So if there was ever a question, I can prove to the court that I was at this location at this very time. It will allow you to send out updates to your clients too. So from the field, I can actually just literally hit a button and send an update to the client saying, well, I was just here and I served John Smith, or I was here and John Smith doesn't live here anymore. Let's talk some more about what next steps we need to take.
What's that software again?
It's called Serve Manager. I believe it's servemanager.com.
Okay. Okay. And I just had a question pop up on the screen here, and I think this is, we tend to live in a world when we're talking with fellow investigators and fellow people in the business, we live in this world with kind of the curse of too much knowledge. Let's step it back just a little bit and tell exactly what service of process is. What is process and why do we have to serve it?
Okay, so essentially, as process servers, what we're doing is when a court case is initiated, all parties that are going to be defendants in that case must be notified of the court case. And going way back to English law, it was deemed that the right way or correct way to do that was to actually serve, as in hand deliver to that defendant a copy of the casework, which would then give them the idea of, in the forms of summons and complaint, what the case was, what the facts of the case were, and then most importantly, where and when the trial was taking place, so they could actually show up and provide their own defense.
Okay.
So we're essentially serving that person with notice that they must appear in court.
A judge has requested your attendance at this hearing or trial or whatever.
Correct. Yep.
And that request is not so much a request as you are hereby commanded to show up at this court on this date at this time.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So step by step, we've kind of worked through the first steps of how you get the business in the door. Once you've got it into Serve Manager, and I'm going to take just a second real quick and share the screen so folks can see Serve Manager. I'm not able to. Here we go. Can you see that? Does that show the Serve Manager software page?
Yep, I can see that.
Okay, good. So that Serve Manager, it's just basically an organizational tool for process servers. And real quick, for the folks who are asking about errors and omissions insurance and bonding issues, here's the website for Yorkie Insurance. And again, Mike Yorkie is a friend of private investigators. Does a really good job of keeping up with the industry and what we need as private investigators. And then one other thing I want to mention, if you are a private investigator and you're acting as a private investigator and you have a conceal and carry permit, some states require, a specific PI carry permit that's above and beyond just the personal carry permit. Talk to your lawyer, talk to your insurance agent about what you need in those terms. So, all right. So we got a question I think is really good. In this age of online price shopping, what would you say sets you apart from others that helps you obtain and retain clients? That's not a bad question. People are trying to get things done as cheaply as possible. If the sheriff does it 3 attempts for $50, what sets you apart? How would someone getting into the business set themselves apart?
Well, what I tell my clients is that I am not the cheapest person around, and I don't want to be the cheapest person around. I want to be known as someone who provides great service. And that means that if you are my client, that if you email me, I'm going to get back to you and respond to your email the same day. If you call me with a question about the service, I will get back to you the same day and answer your question. And that we will go the extra mile too, as well as, things we do in the field, that if we need to run a skip trace report or talk with a neighbor, that we're going to do these little extras that make it worth the while, because often you get what you pay for. And if people are not charging a lot of money, they are probably doing things quickly and probably sloppily, and they're not paying a lot of attention to what they're doing. And that's going to just cost the client in the long run.
Right. And how many times have you get the request for service? You get the request for service and you get the papers, and the address on the papers, how often is that address spot on correct?
It depends. If it's collection work, it's often not a valid address anymore. It may have been a couple years ago. And also too, it also behooves you too as a server to check before you even leave your house. Especially if you're in, a city where there's apartments, if you get a serve for 100 Main Street, go to Google Maps and see, is it 100 Main Street? Is it a house or is it a 20-story apartment building?
Right.
Well, if it's a 20-story apartment building and there's no apartment number provided, now's the good time before you leave home to do your database report to find that unit number, rather than just show up and say, well, I guess I'm stuck. I don't know what to do anymore.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the differences between the sheriff's service and a professional process server. I know in the one county in Tennessee that I'm familiar with, the sheriff gets a paper, it's got the address on it. They go to that address, they try 3 times. And it's usually 3 times within the same day. And they're done. And that's it. Professional process servers will take that address, verify it first. And if it doesn't work out, you hit your databases, you go to public records, you start looking for a good address for the person.
And also too, don't be afraid to reach back out to your client, because sometimes they will know things that they don't bother to mention. And sometimes you have to go back to them and say, well, I've been at this address and this happened. What do you know? And they'll, a lot of times they'll have oh yeah, well, we forgot to tell you ...
Right.
And now you say, okay, now I get it. And another advice, especially for people who are new to this too, don't assume your client, even if it's a law firm, if it's a paralegal or attorney, always know what they're doing. There's been plenty of times I've received papers, and one of the things I do before I even put them into serve manager is I make sure that everything is there and correct to the best of my knowledge. Obviously, I'm not a paralegal, I'm not an attorney, but I can at least check and see, has the court date already passed? Do I have a complaint but no summons?
Right.
And if those things don't match up, I can reach right back out to the client and say, guys, thanks for the assignment, but this doesn't look right. Can you confirm that I have everything I need, or what I need to do to get this job done?
Yeah, and the attorneys are oftentimes busy, overworked, trying to get things done as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible. They've got paralegals typing these things in or not. And, I was a witness to a car accident when I was in college, and I gave a statement to the police. I was one of the people that called 911, and I spoke with an attorney's paralegal on the phone a couple of weeks later. And I got a subpoena to my house about a week later, and it was to Howell, Howell, Humphreys, Hunthrays. I'm like, that's not even close. And I even spelled my name phonetically for the young lady so she would get it right, and just not even close. So what I'm saying is, attorneys and their assistants and that whole process, there are ample chances for people to mistype, miss a word, miss a thing. So verify the spelling, verify the address, verify, whatever information you can. If something looks a little bit off, just take a minute to check it out. Let's talk about finding people when you got something that's kind of funky and the address isn't good. How do you go about locating people if they're kind of difficult to find, Jacob?
Well, I guess the first step, and this really just an initial step, is check with a good investigative database service. I use TLO, and then a kind of a newcomer to the field called IDI or IDI Core.
Right.
I like to subscribe and use more than one because not all databases are equal in all areas, and sometimes it's helpful to play them against each other. But again, and especially for folks who are new in this, don't assume that just because an address is in a database means it's a good address or even the current address. A lot of times these addresses may be an old address, it may be a relative's house, maybe just someplace where they have their mail forwarded to, and to the database, it looks like it's that person's current address.
Right.
So, that's always a good start, but don't assume it's 100% correct. When that doesn't work, a lot of times just being in the field is a good place to start, because no matter what you can see or look up in front of your computer is not the same as actually being on the ground. So if you're at the service address, make note of what cars are in the driveway, write down those license plate numbers, check the tag to see who they're registered to. Sometimes you're going to find out that you talk to someone at the house and they said, I've got no idea who that is. You go back, you run 3 tags, and that's that person's car right in the driveway.
Yeah.
Check with the neighbors too. There's usually a nosy neighbor on every block that knows what's going on. So check with your neighbors, see what they know. One that I've found success with quite a bit is actually go to your local court website and see if that person has court cases. One of my favorite ones is when they have an open court case and you can't find them. I am at the courthouse on the day that they're going to appear in that hallway, waiting for them to come in, and I can serve them then.
Yeah.
That works too. Check with the post office. Do a mail forwarding, see if a new address comes back as well.
I would suggest too, if you're going to find someone at a court hearing, they're going to be there, you think strongly they're going to be there. As Jacob pointed out, serve them in the hallway. If you go into the courtroom and the judge is in there, you very well may get yelled at. You may get in trouble. If the judge has recessed and is out of the room, that might be okay. But man, the hallway is always safe. That's a public area. There's no problem with that. So it's a really good point to check the court cases and see if someone's supposed to be at court at a specific date. Also, if the person owns property, you can check the tax assessor's office and run their name through there, or their mom's name or their dad's name. Maybe they have 2 or 3 pieces of property in town. You can check those things out as well. We got a couple more questions, but before we do that, we're right at the halfway mark. This is PI Education's webinar on process service. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host, and we're joined today by Jacob Osojnak, process server out of Chicago land. Jacob is a good friend of Pursuit Magazine and PI Education. And let's take a minute real quick, Jacob, and just kind of tease out that we are, in fact, working on a process service course for PI Education. And one of the things I want to show you, can you see that? Does that show Pursuit Magazine?
Yes, I can see that.
Okay. So this is one of the articles you wrote for Pursuit Magazine this month, the most recent one, Duplicity and Transparency, talking about how to kind of set boundaries with your clients and be open and honest. And then there's a one that you wrote earlier this year about body cameras, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But real quick, give us a thumbnail sketch of the course we're putting together right now for process servers.
It's kind of, I look at it as kind of a nuts and bolts type of thing that I hope will have, takeaways for both an inexperienced process server and someone who is also experienced. So we're looking at putting together a course that has everything from kind of the history and definitions of process service to real life issues when it comes to licensing, to setting up the business, to obtaining clients, to getting information and serves, and then getting them into your software system, what to do when you're out on the streets, how to skip trace, how to deal with volatile situations, how to deal with the police, how to deal with when you are called into court to testify. And for folks that may know all of the above, I also am a big proponent of thinking about the ethics of process serving too. And I've also thrown in some situations where you can kind of read and listen along and think about, well, what would I do in this kind of weird situation? How would I handle it? And what is maybe the legal, ethical, or the best way to deal with the problem?
Right. And I think that's we're real excited to have that course live here in the next little bit. And this webinar will be parted out and included in that course in some form or fashion. So that's kind of the reason we're doing this one-off webinar. Again, I'm Hal Humphreys. This is PI Education and Pursuit Magazine's webinar. We're joined by Jacob Osojnak out of Chicagoland. And we're talking today about process service. Had a couple of questions from the crowd while I was running on and on about PI Education and Pursuit Magazine. One of them was, what about COVID-19 and how you interact with people out in the field? How has that affected you?
Well, it's definitely had a great effect from March until now. Probably like a lot of folks that were doing process serving, Illinois, we had a stay-at-home order that came in pretty early in the game. So in March, service of process essentially shut down along with the courts, and I had very few, if any, assignments. Um, about, and again, I'm sure this will differ from state to state. Uh, in about early June, our stay-at-home orders were being lifted, and we kind of had gradually increased levels of activity going on, including courts doing some partial reopenings. So I noticed a big jump in my business in June, and it's been pretty busy ever since.
Right.
Um, so uh, being out in the field and staying safe, I guess, I'm a big proponent of two things. One is what I think most people should be doing anyway, which is wear a mask. Um, it's kind of unusual that nowadays that people are afraid to answer the door if you're not wearing a mask. I'm a big proponent of that. Wear a mask, and then I have hand sanitizer in my car. So as soon as I complete a serve where I've been into contact with someone, I go back and I just use my hand sanitizer. Um, Most of the time when I can, I'm going to use social distance my serves. So once I've found the person I'm serving and communicated that to them, usually they're inside their apartment or at the door of their house, and I'll say, okay, now just so we can all be safe and practice good social distancing, I'm going to leave the papers here at your doorstep, and then you can come and grab them as soon as I'm walking back to my car.
Right.
And I don't think people have ever had a problem with that, and I think people will probably appreciate, you're showing respect and concern for their own health and safety by doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say this, we've had some interesting discussions in our Pursuit Magazine happy hours over the past couple of months about masks or not masks. Um, I'll say this, as a professional investigator, I would suggest, even if you don't really want to wear a mask right now, if you're going to be interviewing people or handing off process or, interacting with people in a really close setting, put the mask on just to make them feel better. It really does. Right now, a lot of people really appreciate it when you show up to the house with a mask on. And the hand sanitizer is always a good idea, but right now, I think it's a really important thing. So those are two really good points. Andy Adams asks, do you charge if papers can't be served? If you can't locate the person after X amounts of attempts, do you still charge for that?
Yeah, absolutely. We charge a flat rate regardless of whether we serve that person or not. I know that is also another hot topic in process serving. Um, but I feel that as long as we put in the effort, we should be paid for it.
Yeah.
And there are never any guarantees that you can serve your subject. So I'm not willing to sit there and say that if I can't serve my subject, I'm going to only pay half price, because there's no guarantees in life. And also, too, this is a good way to come back and sell your services. If you can't serve that paper, if the person's moved or you have some question and address, this is a great time to talk to your client and say, hey, I am also a skip tracer. I can perform a skip trace for you for whatever fee you want to charge. And increase your value as a process server by being able to perform that service, get paid for it, now get hopefully a new address and get that paper served, and have an
Yeah.
even happier client than just saying, well, we couldn't find them and that's it.
Yeah. And that's here's the thing, in the private investigations world, guarantees are difficult. It's hard to guarantee a service. It's hard to guarantee a result in a criminal investigation from an interview or something like that. So if you're going to do the work, um, go ahead and charge for it. The outcome is not up to you. You know what I'm saying? If the person's moved or whatever, um, if the thing didn't go down the way somebody said it went down, and you have to come back with bad news, that's just what it is. You're still doing the work of an investigator, of a process server. So charge for your time appropriately, but charge for it. Don't just give things away unless, and I've said this a number of times, and I get in trouble for it a lot. If you're new to the business and you're trying to get a foot in the door, it does not offend me for people to do things for free. And if you got a long-time client and you want to help them out and give a little bit extra, that's totally fine. But charge for your time and charge appropriately, and know that it's really difficult to guarantee results as a private investigator or as a process server. Let's talk. I've got a couple of questions I want to get to. Somebody pointed out the COVID actually helped out their process service business because the sheriffs refused to do process during the COVID lockdown here in Tennessee, and the private processes went up, and they've continued to stay busy. So that's an interesting take. Another thing is, well, hang on. Do you do pro se work for either process serving or surveillance? If so, do you add additional fees, or do you tend to stay away from pro se cases? And pro se is people representing themselves.
Okay, I do deal with pro se clients. I don't have a lot, and I guess I can admit that I will charge pro se clients a little bit of a premium. And the reason I justify that is because they tend to usually need a lot more handholding than the average client. And you have to factor in the fact that you may be spending a lot of time explaining what you're doing and why and the law, and they have a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails and a lot of questions, and you have
Yeah.
to pay yourself accordingly for that.
Yeah. And anytime you can work through an attorney as a private investigator process server, I think that's the best case scenario. But there are times when someone doesn't have an attorney and they need a thing done. So just kind of be real careful with those cases. But I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with doing that kind of work. We've covered kind of how to find people, kind of the upfront stuff. What prep work do you do before you go out to serve, as far as mapping the route, planning ingress, egress, Google Earth, that kind of business?
What was I talked about earlier? I'm a big fan that obviously we don't always have the time depending on our day and our schedule, but a little bit of pre-planning is often a great thing. Again, I'm a big proponent of just going to Google Earth and just looking at your addresses to see whether you've got a house or an apartment building. So you might know if you need to look for a unit number before you get there. Um, Sometimes, if you have known vehicles for the subject, you can almost kind of confirm the address, because sometimes if you go to Google Earth and you see, you know, a red truck in the driveway and your TLO report says they've got a red truck,
Or a
you
pink Mustang?
yes, through Mary Kay. So yeah, you'll have, you might have a good uh, idea that that subject is still at that residence. As for routing software, if you have a big day of serves, it's going to behoove you to organize everything into a logical route. Um, I'm a little bit of an old-fashioned guy in this, because I actually have I think it's a 2013 copy of Google Streets that I use. I find that it's actually the easiest, for me personally, the easiest routing software to use. And I just keep on using it, even though it's getting a little bit more out of date every year. But I know that there's obviously plenty of resources online from MapQuest, paid routing softwares where you can actually put together a route of, 10 to 20 or 30 stops, and, have it make kind of cohesive sense too.
I can say Google Maps is a pretty good service for that. You can key in your addresses and then reorder them as such. I will say this: Google Maps sometimes in the field gets confused, and will tell you, you have arrived at whatever address and you're 15 miles away from it because there's just too much going on. So some thought, some prep in mapping your route is a really good idea. I know that, I'm an old dude and I'm a bit of a Luddite. I used to use paper maps all the time, especially in Davidson County and Middle Tennessee, because I know the routes that are quickest around here. I don't do that anymore. I just key into Google and go. But do spend some time prepping the route to save yourself a little bit of time. You don't want to go uh, to serve one piece of paper over here in West Nashville, and then one piece of paper over here in Lebanon, and then a third one up here in Gallatin, when you could route that a little bit smoother and get them done in a reasonable progression. Somebody says they love MapQuest route planning. It's free, so that's another little tip there. Let's move on to the serve itself, best practices. I know for interviews, I do the same thing every time I go to an interview. So when you're going to the house, you're about to attempt the first service. Do you have a process that you use, kind of a system you use to keep yourself on track and make sure you're doing it in the best possible way?
I think, when I'm in the car before I step out, I want to make sure that I've got the correct address. I want to make sure I've got the right paperwork. Also, too, if you have multiple serves at the same address, make sure you've got all 2 or 3 or 4 papers, because it's no fun when you get back and drive away and then realize, oops, I forgot one paper, and you got to go back, that day or the next day and say, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one. Here's one more for you.
Hmm.
Um, and then I'm a big proponent using a body camera. I always say that video doesn't lie, and video can be your best friend, especially if there's a dispute, especially if a situation escalates, and if you need to be able to prove to a police officer that what you were doing was legal and justified, or if you're being called into court, that video is going to be, worth its weight in gold. So I try to make sure that I'm always filming my encounters, which for me means the second I step out of my car, my body camera is on, so I can literally prove everything that happened from the second I exited my vehicle to when I got back in my vehicle without any gaps in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really important because, like you said, if it's a he said, she said, you're at a disadvantage. Now, I think a lot of times the courts are going to give you a little bit of deference just because you're the professional, you do this for a living. But if somebody says, he threatened me or he accosted me or he whatever, and you got that body cam footage, you can say, no, Your Honor, I did not. And here's a video of the whole interaction. And it's a really good way to do it. So, and Jacob's article on body cameras is a good article. It's on Pursuit Magazine. It posted in February of 2020. Why I started using body cameras for serving process. If you haven't checked that out, please do. It's a really good little discussion about body cameras, how to use them, why to use them, that kind of business. So I think that's a great one. All right, let's talk about safety and legal peril. What about expectation of privacy, do's and don'ts? Do you peek in the window to see if anybody's there? What kind of stuff do you do there?
Well, absolutely not for peeking in the windows. That's just not good business practice, and it's going to get you in trouble pretty quickly with police.
Everybody.
Um, yeah, exactly. And again, back to the using the body camera too. I think most jurisdictions will assume that folks, when they voluntarily open their door, they do not have a reasonable right to privacy anymore. So you are allowed to record. Now, if for some reason you would walk into a person's home, and number one, I have to give you a disclaimer, I would never recommend as a process server that you ever step into a person's property, especially from a security standpoint. And that could include even just taking 1 foot inside of someone's garage when the garage door is open. You don't know what's in the house. You don't know what's on the other side of those doors. So just don't do it.
Yeah.
Um, and then number two, if somehow I was in a encounter where that did go inside, I would let that person know, if I was on my body camera, I want you to know you are being recorded right now, and please give me your authorization that I might continue to record while in your private residence.
Right. And the thing of going into somebody's residence, a lot of times as a private investigator conducting interviews, you have to go inside. That's just where the interview is going to take place for any number of reasons. But I don't like going into people's places unless I'm really comfortable. And Kim Green, Pursuit Magazine editor, is also my wife. And she'll tell you if I'm even remotely concerned about a specific interview, I'll text her and say, I'm approaching this house, this address. If you don't hear from me via text or call in the next 30 minutes, call the attorney and let them know that I'm here. Somebody asks about, one note, John Hagan says he also gets mug shots or photos from Facebook or other social media to make sure he has the right person. I have had people lie to me and say, "Oh no, I don't know who that is," and they are that person. If you can get a photograph in this day and age, Facebook and Instagram and even Twitter, sometimes you can find really good pictures of people to identify who they are. And when they say, "I don't know who that is," you're like, "Is this you?" That can be really helpful. That's a good little point there. Aaron Price says, when approaching a door, be aware of the, and this is in quotes, fatal funnel and stand out of it. Do you agree? I had never heard it called the fatal funnel. I understand what he's talking about. When I go to a front door to interview a witness, I will knock a certain number of times, and then I step back off the front porch and stand in the yard for them to open the door, and then I tell them who I am. How do you deal with that?
I think in general, from a safety standpoint, it is good to not be always directly in front of a door. It certainly doesn't hurt to knock and, step back or step to the side. So you're, out of, range of someone who may be behind the door with, ill intentions. That never hurts.
Yeah. What about trespass signs? If somebody has a sign at the front of the driveway that says no trespassing.
Well, that's an area where I have to put on my attorney's hat. It depends on where you are. Illinois, we are lucky to actually have a no trespass exemption for process servers.
Okay.
So if I see a no trespass sign, I just simply walk right by it and go about my business. And if I'm, questioned, I will let the person being served know that we have an exemption when we're serving process. I have also made too, and I've got in the pocket of my wallet, I call it my get out of jail free card. And I have written down the Illinois statute for a couple of quote unquote problem areas like trespass, and a couple other issues where if a situation escalated and the police were called and you have a police officer who, again, just like attorneys and paralegals, they don't always know the law. And they say, you know what, looks like we're going to have to arrest you for trespassing. I'm going to take out my little card and say, officer, before you do anything, can you please look up statute, blah, 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 and review that, because I think that will show that I'm in the right on that situation. And that really can be a get out of jail free.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. Anytime you can help police officers who, I mean, and God bless them, they're out there doing hard work and they're dealing with nut jobs and crazy people on a daily basis. But if you can show them a piece of paper or even pull up on your phone the code annotated for a specific thing, and you can show them where you're actually not breaking the law, that's a really helpful thing. I was accused of trespass several years ago, and went to the sheriff's office to gather my equipment back up, and the sheriff called me into his office and we had a long discussion, but I was able to show him, here's what I did, here's where I was, and I had documented the whole thing with photographs and video. So I was able to kind of show, here's the real situation. I know what this person said, and I know why they said it, but here's what actually happened. So that's always a good thing. If you've got that little get out of jail free card, that's a good thing. There's There's a thread going on here that is somewhat less than professional, involving Boy Scout knots and beards, which I will chastise the people involved in that later. Professional process servers out in Washington says, in Washington state, serving process is a defense against trespass, but not a permission. So again, when it comes to no trespassing signs, be really aware of your laws in your state. Talk to your attorney. I'm telling you guys, Jacob and I, we're not attorneys. We're not lawyers. What we say is not legal advice. So if you have a question about a specific thing in your state about trespass or expectation of privacy or stuff like that, talk to your attorney. Have them write you a note or a letter, something that you can have in your file. If anybody asks you about it, here's why I believe this, and here's what my attorney said. But if you have legal questions, ask your attorney. Let's talk about legal issues and ethics about the body camera. Do you tell people that you're recording them?
I do not directly, but the corollary for that is that the body camera is visible and at all times, so I'm not trying to hide it.
It's
And
open and conspicuous.
exactly, and as long as I'm not in someone's residence, I don't need to feel any need to announce that.
Right.
And I've been pleasantly surprised. I've been wearing it now for a couple of years, and I could probably count off on maybe one hand the few times that someone's actually had a complaint about me recording them.
Yeah. So for those of you in the field or in the classroom today, this is a picture of Jacob wearing his process server outfit with the body camera right there on his chest. And for those of you, including me in this PI world, that love toys and kit and things like that, this is a really kind of cool get up. But it does say, I'm a professional, I'm a service process server, and the camera is right there in the open. It's visible, it is conspicuous. So I think that's a really good thing there, Jacob. I love the get up too. I love the vest, and it literally says civil process server on the vest, so there's no question about who you are or what you're doing.
Correct. Yeah.
Let's talk about confrontations. How do you deal with confrontations? I've had every response from oh, aren't you nice, to I'm going to kick your ass. How do you deal with confrontations?
Well, I think our job as a process server in the field is to be the adult in the room. We can't let people get us riled up because they're riled up. And what I try to explain to people is that this is not personal. I'm not doing this just because I'm a mean guy and I want to ruin your day. I'm just performing a duty, and it's part of my job what I'm doing. And I know it's not often great news, but it is part of my job and it's part of the way the law works. And I will try to, for everybody that's aggressive, I need to equally slow down, lower my voice, talk slower, be more patient, be willing to explain things multiple times so that people have a chance to let it sink in. And a
Yeah.
lot of times by the end, that person's slapping it on the back saying, boy, I'm so sorry. Today was like the worst day of my life, because when you knock on that door, you don't know everything that happened to that person before they answer the door.
Yeah.
They could have just had the worst day in the world. And you are just the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
And so it really behooves to kind of slow things down, explain, and diffuse that situation.
I'm glad you talked about the diffusing the situation business, because there's a train of thought among some of those in our midst that says, when someone yells, I yell louder, and I have a command presence and I shut them down. We don't have badges. We don't have authority other than the court has asked us to hand this piece of paper to someone. I think it's really important for private investigators and process servers to remember, when somebody yells, you get quieter. When somebody gets confrontational, do not bow up on them. That's not what we're here to do. And this is just my thoughts. And there are obviously a million different opinions on this, I'm guessing. Along those lines, and I promised we would stop this at 12:30. We're going to go over. You okay with that?
Absolutely. I'm having a great
Okay.
time.
What about conceal and carry and weapons as a process server or as a private investigator?
Okay, a couple things on that. Number one, obviously most important, is if you are going to carry a weapon in the field, make sure that you have all the licenses you need. And I'm a concealed carrier in Illinois, but also as a detective in Illinois, I must have an additional license to be able to legally carry while I'm doing my duties as a detective. So, one is to definitely know the law and make sure you have the correct licenses. Number two, make sure you have the correct insurance. And this is my personal opinion, and I'm sure there will be a lot of different opinions on the subject. But in all finality, I would recommend for anybody that if you are going to be pulling your weapon, that it better be because your life is in imminent danger. Because in most jurisdictions, as a process server or a PI, you will be looked at with suspicion. And if you even expose, let alone draw your weapon, I can pretty much guarantee you that unless you have a really, really good reason for doing it, you're going to probably end up in a jail cell, and it is not worth it.
At the very least, you're going to end up making a phone call to your insurance provider.
Yes, not a happy
Yeah.
one.
Okay. Let's see. Strategy for people who are clearly avoiding service. How do you, if someone's dodging, what do you do?
Best thing to do is to document, and then go back and talk to your client. I know a lot of law firms get wrapped up in due diligence and having a certain number of attempts, but I think if you just know that this person is not going to be served, you have a duty to go back to your client and say, how do you want to proceed? I usually tell my clients, there's two ways we can do this. We can keep on making our attempts, and we're going to have to hope that I'm just incredibly lucky someday, and I just happen to be driving up when they're walking out to get their newspaper. But I also, again, using it as an opportunity to talk to your client and sell additional services, I tell clients, depending on what your budget is and how much you want to get this paper served, my motto is surveillance solves all problems. Because if you want to pay for a couple of hours of surveillance, and I usually recommend, hey, if I'm out there at 6 in the morning and I'm sitting in my car till 10 o'clock in the morning, or in the evening time, say 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., there's a really good chance in those 2 4-hour windows that someone's going to go out to get the paper, someone's going to go to 7-Eleven, someone's going to go to work, someone's going to go to school, and then you've got your chance to get that paper served right then and there. And it's almost guaranteed. So I use it as a chance to educate my clients that we can do something a little different, maybe a little bit more expensive, but it's going to get the job done.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I think a lot of people, I mean, a lot of the attorneys I work with, they won't issue a subpoena unless they really need that they don't just issue subpoenas for kicks and giggles. They want that person to either bring a thing to court or show up in court to answer questions. And they're willing to go that extra mile if it's not an easy thing. Joanne Thompson asked, do you charge by attempt or flat fee? I think you answered earlier. You charge a flat fee for a certain number of attempts?
Yeah, we usually charge a flat fee for here in Illinois. I do up to 6 attempts.
Okay.
I tell my clients I hope we don't get to 6 attempts because it either means that we're doing something wrong or the client's avoiding. So
Right.
usually, if I'm not getting the results I want by the 3rd attempt, I'm going to go back to the client and say, I think something's fishy here. Let's talk
Yeah.
strategy on how we can get this served.
I've got another question from the crowd, and this is one that I kind of thought we would get. Philip Montelepre from down in New Orleans asks, "Where can I purchase such a vest? Where do you
Um,
find that?"
you can just look up, do a Google search for body armor, and there are plenty of companies out there that sell it. I mean, and There's plenty of different styles, from hard plates to ballistic inserts to soft armor. So do a little bit of research first and just learn about what level of protection you want, how you want to wear it, when you want to wear it. Wearing plate armor in New Orleans in August may not be a great thing. So you may want to try a soft armor that you can, tuck under a shirt or a large garment type of thing.
Right.
But yeah, just do a little bit of research, Google it, and determine what's best for you and your needs and your price point.
I know in Nashville and a lot of the larger metropolitan areas, if you do a quick search for police or military gear in your city, there's usually a store in your town that like provides police officer uniforms and sewing, patches and stuff on uniforms for police officers. And they usually have, an array of holsters and carriers and vests and stuff like that. So you might check out a store like that, like a military surplus slash police officer gear store or something like that. You can usually find those in the bigger metropolitan areas. Let's move on. And we're going to try and wrap this up. Documentation, obviously you use a body camera for documentation. We were talking before we started, I'm a big fan of Evernote. I use it with several of my attorneys to keep track of things and cases. You said you had found a new way to use Evernote.
Yeah, I've had a quandary that's really bothered me for some years now, and that was that sometimes, when you do enough service or process, you show up at an address and you realize, I know I was here maybe 6 months ago, but I can't remember what happened now. And obviously, if you work for different clients, maybe if you're using different softwares, or acting as a subcontractor, you may not have access to do search features for other people's software or with other clients. And I realized the way to address that problem is I can use Evernote. They have a camera function where when I'm done with the serve, I can just hit the camera, take a picture of my field sheet or serve sheet for that, and tuck it into Evernote. And Evernote basically acts as a giant database, and text in Evernote is searchable. So if that happens again, I could actually, even in the field from my smartphone, go to Evernote, type in either the defendant name or even type in the address, and I could check and see if I had previous serves there, and then be able to pull up the field sheet, read my notes, and know exactly what happened before I even hit the door.
Yeah. And I had a conversation with Jason Addis out in Waco a couple of weeks ago about how to use Evernote. And I think one of the hardest times people have with Evernote is it's such a robust searchable database feature that it's hard to get your head around how easy it is. Does that make sense? It's like if there's text in there, it is searchable. So once you put it in Evernote, you can search it. So I think it's a really fantastic tool. Jacob, we've gone about 10 minutes over. We've got a couple minutes here. Let's just wrap up. I think this business is incredibly fun. I love the PI work. I love doing service of process when I get the call. What is it that you love about this work?
There's two things. I've firmly over the years classified myself as a type A personality. So I don't like to necessarily be behind a desk 8 hours a day. And I think this is a great business to be in because although sometimes you're going to need to be at that desk doing paperwork, a lot of the time you get to jump in your car, you get to drive around, go to different neighborhoods, talk to people, do a lot of, cool investigative things kind of out on the streets that I like. And it just the variety of the work too. I know it's the old adage that every day brings something new, but every serve is kind of a new situation and it's a new case. And although you learn over the years kind of some themes that will come up again and again, there's always something new to learn, and there's always a serve that in the end you'll think, boy, I never saw that coming, or I learned something new today that, this has never come up in 20 years and I'm learning something new all over again.
Yeah, I love that aspect of it. The other thing I love about this work is there's a lot of independence. You get to be on your own in your car, out there driving around, seeing things, talking to people, doing that business. And there's not somebody standing over you saying, have you finished that TPS report yet? If you're an independent kind of person that likes to get out and do the work and charge for, real time and good quality work, then this is a good fit, I think.
And make sure you're organized too. I think that if you don't have strong organizational skills, things can go off the rails pretty quickly because there's a lot of moving parts to this whole service process, Mrs. From dealing with the clients to keeping track of your serves to producing your affidavits and getting them back to the clients. And if you're not on top of everything, it can really go south pretty quickly. And sometimes I almost tell people that I would rather have you be a strong organizer than a strong investigator to start out with, because the investigative stuff you can learn on the way, but the organizational, you got to have that as your foundation to be able to really do a great job in this industry.
Absolutely. And the organizational part, I don't do a lot of process service. But when I do, it's usually like somebody that's been really difficult to find and like, man, we really need to get this served. It's really important. So I'll focus on that one person. But I hadn't thought about if you're going out in the morning and you've done your research, you got all the papers together and you got 20 serves to do that day or 6 serves to do that day. I mean, you've got to know which paper you're picking up to take in and hand to them. You got to remember which one to hand to them, which one to put back in your file, sign for your return. That's an organizational nightmare. If you get one thing out of place, it can be devastating.
Absolutely. Yep.
Jacob, thank you again so much for taking the time to do this today. I've enjoyed talking with you as always. And again, for the folks in the crowd, this is just a small part of a full course we're putting together with Jacob on process service, and we're excited about that. Jacob, thank you again. I hope you have a good afternoon. You're going to be able to join us for cocktails this afternoon?
I'm going to certainly try to do so. So I need to make sure I manage my time correctly and get a couple of serves done this afternoon so I can join you guys.
Very good. All right. Hey, thanks again for being here.
Thank you very much. I've had a great time. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.